Welcome back to Kingdom Commentary, where we discuss topics and ideas surrounding the kingdom of God, from scriptures to the early church, and how thinking through the kingdom informs wise living for our culture today. Welcome back to Kingdom Commentary Podcast. My name is Matt Holiday. I'm here with Josh Brinley. How you doing, Josh?
Good. A little tired.
I'm tired too, man. I got 4 hours last night.
Crazy. Wild man.
Busy.
Yeah. I just want to sit in the sun.
Yeah, dude.
It feels so nice
rain
to
is
sit in the
gone.
sun. Yeah. The rain is gone. The sky is clear, but it's still cold. Just want to bask in the heat.
How's the city?
It's good. I've been looking stuff up on Instagram, like event pages and like fun ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want it to be warm again.
Yeah.
But I know in the city
Me too.
it's always a little bit cooler, but
I'm ready for the summer, always.
yeah, I'm definitely ready for it to be more
What's the
bearable.
point of living in California?
If you don't get the
If
sun.
it's not going to be
Exactly,
summer all the
that's-
time.
It's true.
See anything new recently?
The last thing I watched was the Stranger Things finale,
Okay.
but I haven't watched a movie. It's mainly been shows.
Wake Up Dead Man is getting more press in the Christian subculture.
Really?
Evangelical Christian subculture that you're not really a part of.
Yeah.
And I don't even really want to get into it because it's going to give me...
Oh, is it not good?
It's... People have hot takes.
Oh no.
And I just don't think they understood the movie.
Give me an example of one. Give me an example of something that you liked, that you thought was done well, that someone had a hot take about, that you don't agree with.
People from all over are evaluating Father Judd's faith walk.
Okay.
And there are many people, I think people were at first overwhelmingly positive about his depiction of Christianity. And there have been some who have been like, if I made the movie, I would have maybe focused on this or that. But then there are some that have sort of like I know that all the Knives Out movies are overtly political. That's part of it.
It's part of it, yeah. Or yeah, they're making caricatures of current climate, yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's especially the second one. It's like the whole thing. But they kind of act like Monsignor represented the red conservative Christians, and Father Judd represented the blue progressive inclusive Christians that that don't hold on to orthodoxy or truth. And I think that totally misunderstands the movie by far. Because I think the whole point isn't about the culture war and which kind of Christianity is right. Because honestly, Father Judd never says anything political.
Yeah.
The point is, what is your posture and how do you hold your beliefs? Because Monsignor is aggressive and attacking and volatile, and you can tell it's more about him than it is about the truth. And Father Judd never really drops any hot takes. He just persistently pursues the members of his community with love. But I think people kind of are painting him as like, I don't know. I just think it's a bad take. I've heard people say like this is a preachy movie to ex-evangelicals or something like that. I don't think that's true either, because I think it's not just complaining about the negative parts of the church. It is absolutely building a positive vision for the church. Like Father Judd is the embodiment of like what Christians should be, and to be told from a director and Hollywood that is not Christian is really compelling and interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it shows that the culture actually values something about Christianity, and it's interesting to look at what that is. Anyway, I just think some people just don't.
I just
don't
don't
think
understand
really.
where people get the idea of Father Judd being overtly progressive and like
I don't, because he never says anything,
representing
or
like
he never says anything that contradicts the Catholic Church, even because he's pretty Catholic,
yeah.
which is pretty conservative in a traditionalist kind of way. But he's just really loving and not aggressive. So I don't know.
Right, and that makes him progressive.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm like, I don't know. I think people are
Like
just
because he's not like calling people out on or being really aggressively like because he actually no
That's
he
the
is
thing.
calling
He
people out.
does.
He does call people out,
calls
and
people to confession
he isn't
over and
afraid
over.
to call people out on like their BS. But he's not instilling fear as a tool that he uses
Exactly.
to get to that.
That's why I'm so like.
But if like
People
people
keep
read
saying,
it as
like,
like soft or like you're like
No, it's just
you
Christ.
have too
like,
much
it's crossing.
leeway or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Anyway, I think people are just maybe so caught up in the binary of red and blue
Yeah, that's annoying.
that they read it into things that are more nuanced. And I think that movie is surprisingly
Nuanced.
for how blatant it is in like characters and stuff.
Yeah.
Surprisingly nuanced in its
Mhm.
depiction of faith. And the things it calls out are real things to call out. So it's interesting. I just think I really loved that you can tell the director who isn't a Christian values something about Christians, and to like look at what that is and see that it's basically Christ likeness. I don't know.
And they specifically call out his past as being someone who fights as a direct contrast to him like approaching the Monsignor and seeing that that's the way that he uses fighting as his
Yeah.
primary tool now, whereas Judd came from that and seeks to get away from that instead of fighting and using violence.
Yeah.
He loves.
Yes. So anyway, I didn't mean to like get too caught up in this. But it's interesting. Like
I can see why you're irritated about that
yeah,
take.
I don't think it represents the movie well.
And it forces the movie's message into a binary that's so constricted by American political culture.
Exactly.
That doesn't.
Yeah.
Because the movie definitely speaks to that. It's very clear,
Yeah.
but I don't think the religious aspect of it necessarily has to fit into that.
Yeah. Some person on Twitter compared it to God's Not Dead in its preachiness, and I think that's just totally misunderstands it. But that's okay. That's another.
Interesting.
It misunderstands the genre. I think, in my humble opinion. But and there are things to critique about the movie for sure. I just don't think it's what is being critiqued.
It was more good than it was bad.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. It was great.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be people's favorite. Some people just don't like murder mysteries. And that's fine. And some people don't like movies with characters because it feels over the top. Like it's almost like a play. That's fine. But that's just that's just the style. Yeah.
All of those movies were like that,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
It's not
dramatic. Yeah.
It just happened to have religious themes alongside that.
Yeah. And they were compelling and interesting. And we're not evangelicals, so
it's true.
There we go. Okay. We are jumping into a new topic today. And it is a topic that is frequently discussed in it is I think it would shock maybe most Christians how many books have been written about this in the last 5 years, trying to just educate the masses as much as possible on this topic, because I think it maybe has been one of the most misunderstood parts of Christianity, actually. And that is the Torah, or the law in the Bible. Before we jump into it, I'll just read one verse that I think makes some Christians don't really know what to do with. And it's I'll read more than one verse. I'll read 9 verses. I'll read 8 verses.
Yeah.
I'll read 8 verses. This is the beginning of Psalm 119. Psalm 119, longest psalm in the Bible, made up of big sections that go through the whole Hebrew alphabet, where the beginning of each paragraph starts with the letter from that alphabet.
Yep.
And it is a psalm all about the Torah, or the law. And it says, "Happy are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord. Happy are those who keep all of his decrees, who seek him with their whole heart, who also do no wrong but walk in his ways. You have commanded your precepts to be kept diligently. Oh, that my ways be steadfast in keeping your statutes. Then I shall not be put to shame, having my eyes fixed on all your commandments. I will praise you with an upright heart when I learn your righteous ordinances. I will observe your statutes. Do not utterly forsake me. Okay, the whole psalm, in the longest song in the Bible, is about how much this dude loves the Torah, loves the law. And I think if you're to ask most Christians, do you love the Old Testament law that much? They'd be like, why would I? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of just exposes a little bit that I think we have sort of fundamentally misunderstood the law in maybe most churches in the West, Protestant churches, maybe. And we have all of these negative preconceived ideas about it that I think aren't true and aren't in the Bible. And we miss a lot of the things it is doing because I think we read it with certain expectations in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to do is just kind of go through different parts of the laws and how they talk about them in the New Testament too through this series. But first, what I thought we could do today, just to like spark interest, get people thinking, and then maybe we can elaborate on these as we go through the series, is, and this is really, 7 of these are from Paul Sloan and Logan Williams. They have done a ton of work on this, and basically I'm just stealing it and making it more accessible, hopefully, and mixing it with some other stuff. But I want to just go through a few things that the law is not, and the few things the law is. Just like we kind of went through the gospel, and the few things the gospel is not, and then a few things it is. But let me ask, like, what comes to mind when you hear the law? And like in church, is that something you ever talked about? Is it something you ever had positive or negative connotations with in your journey growing up?
I think I was confused between the relation of the law to the New Testament.
Yeah.
And something I've thought a lot about is Romans, because Paul talks about the law a lot in Romans.
A lot.
And trying to untangle a lot of those thoughts.
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't even think I have a fully developed idea of what the law is and how it functions now.
Yep.
Or what its significance means now. Yeah. No, I don't think I learned that much about the law. I think that's common for kids, though. You spend a lot of time in the Old Testament about stories, but not necessarily the importance of the law.
Yeah.
But it's a theme in the background of everything.
Yeah. Sometimes the foreground.
Yeah. And I've learned a lot more about like the kinds of things that it represents. Especially when it comes to the law being like sort of a guide or a template for God's people to be like a beacon
to serve
in the world, and how that aligns their hearts to like be part of God's community. Like, I think a lot about their dependence on God and not things of the world, like we've talked about, like military alliances. That comes up a lot. Is like God's like, don't make military alliances. I'll just protect you. You just have to like believe that
trust.
I'm for you.
Trust God.
And then they don't, and then they get wiped out anyways, or exiled and things like that. That's most of what I think about when it comes to the law, or like idolatry and things like that. That's pretty like central. But when it comes to how it's being talked about in the New Testament, in the early church and things like that, and how it's being, I think I'm more compelled to understand how it would have been taught by Paul to Jews rather than the Gentiles. That's more compelling to me.
That's up for debate for sure. But I think we'll build toward Romans, and we will go through Romans.
Yeah, I know Romans is kind of crazy.
I'm always hesitant to talk about how or what should apply to the Jewish people today, because I'm not Jewish. I'm sort of like, I don't want to put something on someone's conscience that like isn't mine. It's for them to figure out and come to their own conclusion in a sense. But I do want to look at those questions for sure and reason through some of the strongest positions, I think. Growing up myself, I do remember thinking, well, I know things used to be really strict and legalist, and then I know Jesus got rid of all that because he was just like peace and grace. And so now we don't have to follow it except for the 10 Commandments. That's kind of what I thought as a kid. It's like, those ones we keep, the rest maybe not. Which none of that I think has any basis really. But that's just sort of how I internalized it. That's what I remember. So let's go through some of these and maybe one at a time. Number 1, the law is not, the word Torah doesn't really mean law. That's number 1, which is like a kind of a problem because I don't really know what to call this series if we don't call it the law. We could call it Torah, but it sounds a little, I don't know, I like using words that we would normally use.
Yeah.
It most explicitly would mean something like instructions or teaching.
Yeah.
Instructions, like covenant instructions, something like that.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Well, for the rest of this list, I'm going to call it law or Torah anyway. Okay. But then we can develop something that I think maybe
that's a big area of knowledge that I don't know really much about. That you've been able to teach me a lot about is the meanings or multiple meanings of the words that are used in the Torah. That
yeah. And Torah
you wouldn't know based on English translation whatsoever.
Yeah, I think law puts something really specific into our head that they don't mean, and we'll look a little more in detail at that too. Another one, law is obeying the law is not and has never been about earning your way to God or heaven. It was not a way for it was not like Paul makes it really clear. You can't earn your way to God through the Torah, but the Israelites never believed that in obeying the laws, they were earning their way to God. I think that's important. That was never an idea they had to get rid of. That was never a reality. In the medieval Catholic Church, there was sort of the idea that you earn some righteousness to get to heaven, or you can purchase it, that Martin Luther was really pushing against. And then I think he kind of looked back into the Bible and read that context onto the Jews. He was a little anti-Semitic himself. He wrote a book called On the Jews and Their Lies. And I know, Martin Luther, pros and cons. But that was a big blind spot of his. And I think he saw the Jews as legalistic, earning their way to God. But ancient Israelites were not that way. I think that's important. Pharisees were not that way, actually. I think that's important. We'll get there. But they were not about earning their way to God. That's not what that nobody thought that was what the law was for. Another one, Jesus rejected the law or replaced it or abolished it and legalism in favor for grace, and he did away with it on the cross. That's a big misconception, I think. And it's understandable. Like you see Jesus, it feels like he's bending some rules, and it feels like people get upset with him for it.
Yeah. Well, he's challenging interpretations,
but that's
constantly.
That is, I think, the key point. He is constantly telling them, I'm interpreting the law correctly, and you're not taking it seriously enough because you're interpreting it incorrectly. Not, it's an oppressive system and I've done away with it. But it's a liberating law and I'm interpreting it correctly and you're not. That's an important distinction. Another one, the law demands perfection and is an impossible burden. That would have just been so foreign to an ancient Israelite who would have been told the law is a gift of grace. And nobody thought, I think sometimes we think like the ancient Israelites were like, man, we have to follow all of this perfectly. And as soon as I mess up one, I'm being stoned to death or something like that. And none of them thought that. There are things in place to make things right because you're going to mess up. And that's okay. There are some big no-no situations where there's nothing that you can do to fix it. But all the time, it'll be like, this character was blameless before the law. Paul says, I was blameless for the law. David was blameless for the law. And I think they didn't mean they never messed up. They mean they always made it right when they did. And so they're good. So the law never says you break one rule, you've broken them all. No, it's not like you break one rule and you're out. It doesn't work like that at all. It doesn't even say like all the laws are on the same level and one small sin is the same as one big sin. Nothing like that at all. It doesn't demand perfection. It just demands faithfulness, like the pursuit, and as a way of life. Another one, being impure, ritually impure, means that you are in some way evil or sinful. I think that is a big misconception.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit already.
A little bit, yeah. They had, like all ancient civilizations actually, ideas of ritual purity and impurity, which limited the things you were allowed to do around the temple. If you, the most common ones, like have a rash, like lepra, or like a lot of people call leprosy, or have a bleeding problem, or touch something dead, you are ritually impure. There is nothing wrong with being ritually impure in the Torah. In fact, they very much expect that almost everyone is going to be ritually impure every week. And that is just a normal part of life. And then you make yourself ritually pure if you want to go certain places. But there's no negative stigma. I think we hear impure and we think of like a really strict system. And another one that's related, that people that were ritually impure were marginalized or rejected. That is not necessarily true either. And we'll talk about that too. Like people were cared for, and being ritually impure really only affected if you could go to the temple. And most people weren't going to the temple every day. So you could be ritually impure for a very long period of time and it wouldn't matter. It's almost like we act like people would never touch someone that was ritually impure.
Yeah.
And Jesus was so crazy for touching someone that was ritually impure. But all you had to do to make yourself ritually pure again, if you became ritually impure, was like take a bath and wait a day. And almost everyone could do that. They could touch somebody and then take a bath, wait a day when they want to go to the temple. So that's a whole idea and system that we will address. I think like even pretty good depictions of Jesus, like The Chosen, often show like all the Jewish people are like, oh, don't go near that guy. He's impure. Like we can't touch him. Jesus is like, nah. And whatever. And it's like, no, that's not how they thought about it at all. That's ritual impurity was normal. Ritually impurity was common. You're probably ritually impure more often than you're not. And there's nothing sinful or there's no stigma around it. So I know I'm kind of just like listing things that might surprise people and then not explaining them very much, but I think the next episodes will be deeper explanations into these. Another one, the law is ethnocentric and highlights Israel, but has nothing to say about Gentiles. I think that one is a big misunderstanding, that maybe Jesus did away with it because now Gentiles are included and there's no more Israel privilege. But I would say the law never really privileges Israel anyway. And not all laws apply to all people. Some laws apply to the Gentiles as well, in a way. Because God judges nations that are not Jewish if they mistreat the poor. And Israel is not to mistreat the poor, but no human is to mistreat the poor. But Israel is to circumcise their children and not wear mixed fabrics. Gentiles, it doesn't matter. It doesn't apply to them. It applies to the Israelites. And then priests were to wear certain clothes, very specific clothes, almost like a costume, like a work outfit. But that doesn't apply to everyone else. And then the high priest has to wear very, very specific clothes. And that law only refers to him. And that doesn't refer to all the priests and definitely not all Israel. So different laws can apply to different groups of people. And that was normal. It's not like every rule was for everybody. They were able to, yeah. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. The law uniformly obligates all humans. It doesn't do that. What we just said. The law is a comprehensive law of morality. It does not address every situation. It doesn't even attempt to address every situation. It's not like a constitution where they like add laws for every single situation you can think of.
That's true about Christianity too.
Yeah.
We talked about that very early, and there's not like a playbook for every situation, every circumstance.
The Bible doesn't have a situation for every circumstance. Like that is directly applicable, and nor is it intend to. Yeah. Another misconception, people might say the law governs external actions but doesn't govern the heart.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, there are those who have said like when Jesus says, "You have heard it say, do not murder, but I tell you, do not hate your brother in your heart." And they're like, see, the law only stops you from like getting physically violent, but Jesus has a higher standard than the law, which is about like your emotions and desires. Meanwhile, Leviticus actually says, do not hate your brother in your heart. So the law actually has commands about your internal state, not just what you do. Like, do not covet is not an observable thing that someone can hold you to account for. It is a command about your desires and something that nobody can see. Last two, that the law is statutory law, and nations should adopt those laws today. There are those who believe this called theonomists that want to like make Torah country laws. I think that's a misunderstanding of what they are. Because statutory law is laws that have like consequences, and when you're in court, the judge points to that law and applies it because it's the direct situation. Statutory law did not exist in the ancient Near East. It was an invention of like Greeks and later Romans, and it was stricter. Actually, the Chinese also had a similar thing at one period in like an ancient dynasty, but before that, statutory law did not exist. And so some of the consequences seem really harsh when you read the law.
Yeah.
But then you realize they weren't applied like statutory law is today. And there have been a lot of books written about this by a guy named Lefebvre and another guy named Joshua Berman, a Jewish guy. And they talk about how like one of the laws is if your child is not disrespectful, but rebellious. If your son is rebellious, stone him. And then you look throughout all of ancient Israelite history, and nobody ever did that, at least not on record. In fact, they instituted judges that would like solve legal disputes. No judge in ancient Israelite history ever cited one of the laws. And it's not because they were disobeying it. It's because that's not how they thought laws were to be applied. That's how statutory laws are applied. But statutory law, this is not statutory law. It is like wisdom principles that they want to draw on and apply the heart of to different situations. And we'll get there in a second too. Last one. Sacrifices. Last misconception. Sacrifices are about God punishing an animal instead of you for your sin.
I've never even heard that one.
Really?
Yeah.
I think that is like maybe the most common understanding of sacrifices.
Really?
Yes, like the animal suffers
I
and
never
dies,
thought that.
so I don't have to suffer and
That
die
seems like a
because
weird
I did
framework.
something wrong. It's not only a weird framework, it is way closer to Roman pagan sacrifices than anything near biblical sacrifices. That if it's nowhere in Leviticus, that idea. That the animal like substitutes for your death because you deserve death because of your sin, and it dies and now you don't have to. So,
because like if you applied that, then it wouldn't matter what quality of animal that you brought.
no,
It could be like a diseased animal and it still would die.
Exactly.
It wouldn't matter, but that's not what it's about.
Not only that, I think there's this thought that like the animal suffers and dies because I deserve to suffer and die. But the animal's actually not allowed to suffer in Levitical sacrifices. And if it does suffer, it's not fit to be sacrificed because it's not pure and unblemished. It's supposed to be killed cleanly, quickly, and safely. If it suffers, like if you were to whip it or you can't sacrifice it. So we'll get to what sacrifices are, but they are not substitutes for your death because of sin. And they don't carry your sin. You don't put your sin on the animal and kill it. There's a totally different system that they're working with that we'll talk about on a future episode soon. Okay, so those are all things it's not. Here are things it is. It is, instead of statutory law, it is common law. And common law is what they call ancient law codes, where they're examples of morality embedded in culture. And you take those examples of morality and you look for the wisdom in the principle, and then you apply it. So, for example, if you're rebellious, if your son is rebellious,
That's
stone him.
stoning.
You could think like, one, this probably applies to, I think most scholars believe this applies to like an adult son who's like not taking care of their parents when they're elderly or something like that. And the principle is, it is an extreme sin, like worthy of death, to neglect your parents when they need your help. And that gets applied in different situations where people neglect their parents. But most of the time, it didn't, as far as we know, none of the time did it actually involve the death of the child. But it wanted to carry the significance of the weight of that sin, that this is in the top, like of like worst things you can do. And there are different, depending on how the child or son or whatever responds to that, the judge might require different things of them. It might be stoning to death if they're like extremely neglectful. It might be prison if they have one. They didn't have one in the wilderness, but they have one maybe in the promised land. It might be if they're remorseful about it. It might be making things right in a certain way, giving your parents a certain level of your income or something. But it's not about just taking a law and applying it. It's common law, which means these are examples to learn wisdom from, and that's significant. Not just copy paste. 2, these laws are embedded in narrative. So, like, if you look at, a lot of people compare the Torah with the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi was like this Babylonian law that the king Hammurabi wrote out. That's just a list of rules. And it's common law, too. Like, it wasn't followed strictly. And you see some overlap. There's like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in it. But it is just a list. There's no story involved. All of the rules in the Torah interrupt stories. Like, they're in the wilderness and they're traveling. And as they're traveling, this complex affair happens. And then there are laws about affairs. And then you get back to the story. And none of them are disconnected. It's not like you can like take them out and just put them in a rule book. None of them are a rule book. They're all part of the story, and they can only be read in dialogue with the story they're in. So you read a story about incest, and then you read rules about why you shouldn't do incest, and you learn from the story why these rules had to be explicit, and then you turn back to the story again, and you're supposed to gain wisdom from the story and the rules combined. That's an important part of interpreting Torah. It's wisdom literature. It's not meant to make you follow them all perfectly. It's meant to make you wise, a wise person, which means you know how to discern complex situations that aren't even listed here because you've internalized this so much. They're adaptable. They don't always stay the same. Like, they change depending on where they are. If they're in the desert, they get some laws.
Right, yeah.
When they're in the promised land, they get some others because different location, different situation, and the wisdom gets applied differently. Some laws contradict each other, and they have to decide what is a faithful way to follow Torah. So, for example, the Sabbath. You're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. There are lots of things that constitute work on the Sabbath. Circumcising is work. You can't do that on the Sabbath. However, male children are to be circumcised on the 8th day. So what if the 8th day is on the Sabbath? What are you going to do? They have to pick which one is more important. And they say the 8th day is more important than the Sabbath. So they would say you are following Torah if you circumcise your kid on the Sabbath if it's on the 8th day. But if you don't, and you say, it's the Sabbath, I'm not going to, they say you break Torah because one is more important than the other. And there's a whole tradition of called halachic readings where they're discussing which are the more important rules and how if you neglect the more important rule because of a less important rule, you actually break Torah. So preservation of life is always the number one rule. So if it's a period of fasting, it could be Torah, you are not to eat on these days because it's a communal fast. But if a pregnant woman has a craving, you are allowed to break fast for her, because pregnancy is really fickle and you want to be really careful to make sure she has all the nutrients she needs for her baby. So it's always priority of the most important Torah law takes precedent over the less important one. And if you prioritize the less important one, not only are you wrong, you're breaking Torah, they always say. Like priests have to take care of the tabernacle. Their mission is more important than the Sabbath. So they can work on the Sabbath. And if they don't, they actually break Torah. So there's like this hierarchy.
Very dynamic.
Yeah, it's adaptable, it's dynamic. There's a hierarchy. And they sometimes get into a debate. They're like, I feel like this one's more important. I feel like that one's more important. And they work it out. But when they've come to like a really strong conclusion, like this is more important, and you do the other one, you break Torah. And that's a big thing Jesus and the Pharisees argue about. Like which is more important in different circumstances. He'll be like, you do this, but you neglect your parents. That's breaking Torah. You've got them mixed, you've got the wrong priorities. And that actually ends up centering a lot of his arguments with them on the Sabbath, where he's like, this is more important than that one because of the time or the place or whatever. Like Passover, some things are allowed in Passover that aren't allowed in other times, or vice versa, things like that. Torah is a description of covenant faithfulness. It is about maintaining a healthy, loving relationship with God and others. So fundamentally, it takes place in a covenant relationship. Like Israel, how do they be faithful to God? It doesn't initiate the relationship. God initiates the relationship before he gives them the Torah. He rescues them from Pharaoh. Again, it's not about earning their way to God. It's not like God gave them the Torah when they were in slavery and was like, follow this, and then if you follow it perfectly, I'll save you.
Yeah.
He saves them for no reason because he hears them calling out. And then he's like, now that we're in a relationship and you said yes, and I say yes, like a marriage almost, here are our commitments to each other now, our vows, our promises for how to be faithful to each other. And he promises to be faithful to them if they're faithful to him. And that they define the faithfulness of the relationship. And then finally, Torah is a presentation showing two ways to live. And I think this is important too. Torah is about how to love the best in the situations you're in. Like Jesus says, the whole law and prophets hangs on love your neighbor and love God. Yeah. But it also shows the consequences of not doing that. So the end of Deuteronomy is these Torah laws, two huge lists of consequences. And it's like, one is blessing and life, and one is curse and death. And it's like, if you follow the wisdom of Torah, you will get blessing and life. If you fail to, you will get curses and death. And both of those are part of Torah. So often Paul will be like, Torah did this to us. And it sounds like he hates the Torah. Yeah. But what he means is we have failed to live up to Torah. And so the consequences, the curses, have come on us or something like that. Oh, I'm sitting weird because I feel like I have to explain it. I've been sitting weird in like if you're watching, if you have the privilege of watching us, I throw my back and I just have to like keep constantly adjusting how I'm sitting in awkward positions.
I think the statutory versus common law thing, that's complex because we understand law fairly differently from that.
Yeah.
As like a moral kind of guideline, but not a if then kind of application for law. That's hard to understand because at first it doesn't quite make sense, like why it would even be there if they weren't going to do it, if it seems like clear. But that probably has a lot to do with how they understood how this was presented. I don't know. That's hard for me to grasp. Yeah, so I just don't understand that really.
It's hard because it's a completely different culture, and our English word law relies on a history that we have that they didn't. Which is also why maybe another word would be more appropriate, like covenant instructions or something like that. That feels more, I don't know.
It's more the law is stuff that makes more sense to me. Yeah. My reading of the Old Testament, and then the law is not stuff is stuff that I have to like wrestle with a little bit
Yeah.
and try and understand.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know, again, I just dropped them, and we'll work through them a lot slower when we get to them. But
the law is not part. The law demands perfection and is an impossible burden. I know we've talked a little bit about the Sermon on the Mount.
yeah.
And the way that Jesus talks about the law in a way that feels like an impossible burden.
Yeah.
Like, I think you've said that it's like this really high, like, view, an ideal of law that seems impossible.
Sure.
To, like, maintain.
Although it's important to note, Jesus ends his sermon not with, and if you obey every part of this law perfectly, you will be in the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
But if you mess up one of them, you won't be.
Yeah.
He just says, if you hear my words and apply it, like live by it. And I don't think Jesus expects perfection immediately at all. And he didn't die so that we don't have to be perfect in a sense.
Which seems weird because at the beginning he's talking about like the iota, like I didn't
take
come
one
to,
iota out of the law,
right?
Then it's
which makes it, that makes it seem like if you miss one thing that you're you're not getting into heaven or something like that.
Yeah.
But actually, I think it's like priming basically to be like, now you don't just take this and like throw it out. Like it's still important, but that doesn't mean that you have to be completely like blameless and everything.
No, yeah. I don't think he has unrealistic expectations.
He does, and obviously God knows that because of Israel and doing all the things that they've done.
Yeah.
This goes back to like a lot of the, you know, the heroes and like the people that are like, that God really like works through in really interesting and unexpected ways. Like you think about David and all of the ways that people like that continually messed up, but were actually still at the end of the day, like trying their best and doing a lot of good things as well. And so if those people, like if one thing defined their whole like salvation or something, a relationship with God, then it would have been very clear that they would have been like out of the kingdom of heaven or something like that. But that's not the case.
Yes.
It's not the case throughout the entire Old Testament.
Yeah.
And so that gives like some hope when you take that to the New Testament of what Jesus might mean when he's saying some of these things. That understanding of how it was treated in Old Testament scripture helps me understand there's more to this than what I might initially like try and like get from what he's saying. It feels like cut and dry, but nothing's ever like cut and dry.
And it gets confusing when you see like Paul say, nobody is righteous because we've all failed to attain the law. And you go back and you're like, read the Old Testament, and they're like, David, the righteous man who followed the law, Noah, who was blameless and walked in all of God's ways, Job, who was blameless and completely righteous. And you're like, well,
after it just took an entire book telling you how they weren't.
Exactly. So which is true. Is one exaggerating?
The major slip-ups that they
did? Yeah. So I think that's important. And maybe to end this a little short episode, maybe this picture I think might help too. People like just if all of this is like brand new and like surprising and you're like, I don't know about this, maybe this would help. Again, I think it's so easy to be the framework that we're earning our way to heaven with the law and to just be like, nobody thought that at the time. So nobody felt the need to like really address that at the time. And so Jesus, even with his really high standard that he's calling his disciples to, nobody thought, oh, if I don't do that, I'm not going to heaven or something like that. That's not even the framework they're thinking of. They're not thinking of heaven at all. It's much more about a relationship with a partner. It's a covenant instructions with God. And it's not about earning your way into that relationship. It's about maintaining faithfulness in that relationship. So if two people get married, it's not like, if you obey all the vows that we make to each other, then I will marry you. It doesn't work that way. You get married first. And once you're married, you have vows that you commit to each other, that usually, I guess, I don't know, two people commit to be faithful to each other, not cheat on each other, whether they are in sickness and health, all that stuff, that to appreciate each other, to value each other, right? That needs to happen for that relationship to continue. But if there's a moment where one partner doesn't value the other, or a moment where one neglects the other while they're sick, does the relationship immediately end? No, obviously not. Are they going to maintain their vows perfectly throughout the relationship? No, they're not. But that doesn't mean that one of them can't represent the ideals of the relationship and say, this is what we're building toward, and this is the goal, and we're going to get here. The problem is when one partner is done and cheats and doesn't turn around and never turns around. And that is what the Old Testament describes Israel as doing. Not just slipping up once, but like completely rejecting permanently, so that there's almost like a divorce. And then when Jesus comes and says, I'm bringing the restoration, it's like we're renewing the marriage, and I'm painting what this renewal looks like. And I'm going to give you the ability to be a part of this. But he doesn't say, and now you don't have to obey any of the vows because I got rid of all of that. And no one expected, oh, if I just obey the vows now, we'll be in a relationship again or something like that. They were waiting for a restoration so that they could follow the vows again. It's not about perfection, and it never was, but it's about faithfulness. And that faithfulness expresses itself in the vows. And you could imagine a husband talking about how beautiful them and their spouse's vows were, and how life-giving they are, and how much they love those vows, even if they're not always lived up to perfectly. And I think that's the mindset the Psalm 119 author has. And that's, I think, how Christians are actually supposed to view the law, as like these beautiful, faithful examples of faithful relationship to God. That takes some interpretive work when they're in a very messy culture and context, and how to think them through today. But I think that's how Israel was supposed to think about them. I think that's how Jesus thought about them. I think that's how Christians are supposed to think about them. And I don't think we're supposed to think, oh, thank God got rid of the vows now, so we're married to God and we can just do whatever we want. It's like, thank God he restored the relationship and has now empowered me to be able to follow the vows. And that's a different way of saying, and it avoids legalism, because a marriage is not based on legalism where you mess up once and you're done. It doesn't work that way. But it's also not lawlessness where you can go cheat and do whatever you want. So that might be a metaphor.
Right. Well, yeah, because if something messes up, it's worked through, and then you move forward past that.
Yeah. And that's what people do. That's what David and Moses do. They're like, it doesn't mean there's not consequences either.
Right.
Just because there's forgiveness, sometimes there still has to be consequences. If someone slips up and cheats in a marriage and the other person's willing to forgive them, completely forgive them, that person still needs new boundaries. They need probably counseling. They need to confess. They need to completely maybe reset how they value the relationship and make sure they don't do that again. And we get all these instances of Israel, of Moses, of David, completely messing up in what feels like an almost irreversible way, receiving forgiveness and still experiencing the consequences of their actions. Not because God is vindictive anyway, even though he forgave them, but just because that's how vows work. Like there are consequences to breaking relationship that hurt, and they experience that hurt in different ways. So
yeah, it's a beautiful visual.
Yeah, thank you. I probably am just riffing on Paul, but yeah, I'm excited to go through these a little bit more in depth. Try to make them as accessible as possible. But I think, again, this is like one of the most misunderstood ideas in Scripture
For
that
sure.
we really undersell. I mean, I was doing a study on the law soon, and one person once asked, was like, "Hey, can we do something on the New Testament instead?" And I'm like, it's hard to get people to see it, but the law is all over the New Testament, and Jesus, and the Gospels, and Paul. And Paul has some complicated things to say about it, but we'll look at why. And it's not less there than it is in the Old Testament. It's still thoroughly there. I think we've just so thoroughly gutted it from our Christian vocabulary because it has some kind of negative connotation. Because we read the word law through the lens of Martin Luther and the medieval Catholic Church in 14th century. But that was just one blip in history, and it was important to address in the way he did. But we're not in that situation now. And I think it's important to revisit what they were talking about in the Bible. So
it's definitely a problematic thing for a lot of Christians. Finding out what the significance of the Old Testament is, because like a lot of people don't spend a significant amount of time or a meaningful amount of time digesting it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I've said this before, but I found a lot of value going back and reading the Old Testament and how connected it is with the New Testament.
Yeah.
And how many things that are preserved and referenced and things like this that are very practical and useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not common.
Maybe something just kind of occurred to me that maybe I'm going to be careful about is I think a lot of people who did grow up in legalistic homes or churches have found a lot of peace in the idea that Jesus does not hold us to the law and has replaced that with just grace or something like that. And I don't want to undercut that piece, but I actually want to kind of do almost the opposite and say, like, God has always been grace first and generous and forgiving first, always.
That takes a lot of work too.
It does. And to say that, like, God used to hold people to these hard standards until Jesus and now he doesn't. It's almost to be like, this husband used to be really abusive or like harsh, and now he's super graceful. And now you can appreciate that you live in a time where he's really passive.
Yeah.
Instead of actually he was gentle the entire time. And that's not the purpose the law ever filled.
The idea of a two sort of temperament God, Old Testament, New Testament.
Trying to get rid of that a little bit.
Like, there's a lot of good books that talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a question I've struggled with myself too. That takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I think also though it's good to work through that, because I wouldn't say I'm 100% resolved on that idea. I think it's still tough.
It is.
When I think about it, because the Old Testament is very different from the New Testament in a lot of different ways. And I think it's good to acknowledge that. It's not like it will easily map on exactly in a way that makes sense immediately. Because if you look for that, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
It takes work. And I think that's where a lot of this interpretive terminology and practice, I guess, if you want to call it, comes in handy, because there's a lot of value to understanding how it would have been written or interpreted by the people that it was written for.
Yeah.
And then how that naturally transformed with Jesus and how then he interpreted it.
Yes.
And why that's valuable, because you can't just rip away the Old Testament and then look at the New Testament, because a lot of what Jesus says wouldn't make any sense, because he's constantly referencing the Old Testament. So if you can't, it just would, you're like, oh, then half of what Jesus said or more just was like, oh, like that doesn't apply.
Yeah.
That doesn't really make sense. So it begs the work to be done to really understand what the gospel means in its fullness.
So let's do the work.
Let's do the work.
Let's go.
But yeah, no, this is an exciting topic. I'm excited to go more in depth about it too, because
Because I love it and I'm really excited about it.
good.
But whenever I tell people, "Oh yeah, we're gonna study the law," you know, like, exactly. So I'm gonna try to like make this a little more exciting, you know, and I think this is a good hook to like get people thinking.
I think it's a good breakthrough for a lot of people. It's going to be a big breakthrough for me as I continue to think about it and digest. So
yeah, and I think churches really do kind of like lean legalist, moralist, or lean just like everything goes, and to find a more biblical, robust understanding of wisdom, I think is going to be core and really cool.
And I think like another, I guess, a closing comment is like, the more churches that I've been to, the more I've realized a lot of like, especially at the one time I went to Isaac's church,
Park Hill in San Diego.
they have a really like deep understanding of the scriptures that I think I just didn't expect. Some of the things that I hear, well, just like thinking about what we were talking about with the gospel in the last series and its interconnectedness with multi-ethnic, multicultural identity, and that being central to the idea of what the gospel is when it comes to it being the church as like the whole world.
Yeah.
Everyone. It just makes me think it's comforting to know that people that lead these churches have those well-developed understandings of these things. Because I don't think, one, that's not always the case.
Yes.
I don't know. It helps me put trust in the communities that these people are building.
Yeah.
In these churches, because honestly, I mean, a lot of some of these ideas that we've discussed are like deeper level stuff that you really have to engage with people and talk about. And I don't necessarily see as much of that just visiting a church once or twice, you know.
Yeah.
Getting into some of that deeper stuff. So I enjoyed that church experience, and I think it's opened my eyes to really be a bit more not go into a new church like expecting like I'm not going to
cynically.
Yeah, and I've been wanting to break
that
down
problem
some of the cynicism of visiting a new church, because I think that's really easy. I admit that's something I do, and I don't like it. It's not a good thing.
Maybe even just to vocalize this on the podcast, because we talked about this off the podcast once or twice. But like part of the goal of this podcast is that, like, I think at least I have a tendency to be hypercritical or cynical. Like, and sometimes I just can't turn it off. Like, I was at a worship thing the other night, and it was great. And it was like, I don't know, I got prayed for. And it was a church I'm not usually a part of in San Francisco. I just love the community there. And it was really cool. And people were sharing different impressions and prayers on the stage. And I was just like, this is awesome. And then one person goes up and it's like, says something about a definition of a Hebrew word. And I just know it's wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I know that they said the word wrong, and then they gave the wrong definition, and then they applied it in a way that didn't make sense. And to me, I was like, I can't let that go. And I just like, that was the only thing I thought about for like an hour. And I'm like, first of all, probably nobody even remembers that after tonight. It didn't really take anything away from the service. And I'm just being an asshole about it. And I have that cynical tendency to like go into a place and just like let things bother me to that level.
Latch on to the negative.
Yes.
The one thing, or at least something that hit you in a negative way.
Yes, yeah. And here and one, I don't know who that person was, and maybe they didn't even go there. Like, maybe they just went up and shared, and that's okay. People also maybe made a mistake. Also, like, there are a million podcasts out there being critical about things and cynical. And I know maybe you could say you think otherwise, but I think we both have sort of like a critical or cynical sense of humor sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. And I want to work really hard. I feel like it's even slipped up in the podcast as I talk sometimes. And I want to be clear, like that is not my goal, or that is not our goal. I want to be positive in what we are looking toward, not negative in what we are looking against. And I want to be building a positive vision for the ideas that I think are good for the church to wrestle with and be excited about those things rather than the negative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's better that instead of just cut out the negative things, talk about it here when we do mess up and be like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have done that so much. Probably. Maybe that was a bunny trail.
Good start though.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking forward to the rest of it. I'm going to drop a ton of book recommendations on this series.
Good, yeah.
But the first one today, I'll just say Jesus and the Jewish Law. No, Jesus and the Law of Moses. Jesus and the Law of Moses by Paul Sloan is going to be one of the most foundational parts of this series. So thanks for listening. And if you want more bonus content, subscribe. It's a nonprofit. So we support and we run off of the generosity of listeners and
donations by viewers like you.
Exactly. And we have some more ideas that would be cool to do with more resources. So we would appreciate
people.
And it would be cool just to build a community and have a fuller conversation about some of these topics. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. We would love to hear from you. If you have thoughts or questions from today's episode, please feel free to reach out and email us at info@kingdomcommentary.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or rating wherever you found this podcast and send it to a friend. That helps us a lot. Kingdom Commentary Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit supported by listeners like you. If you'd like to support what we're doing or become a patron, sign up for our Patreon and get exclusive access to bonus content, or go to kingdomcommentary.com/give to make a donation. Finally, Kingdom Commentary is co-hosted by Matt Holliday and Josh Brinley and produced by Will Coons. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.